god Baal in thanks for a safe journey. So we find these anchors there. So that's the religious side of this temple. On a more functional side, the fact that, again, this is 40 meters off the plain and you can see Cyprus on a clear day, this also would have been visible from the sea and could have acted as a reference point for sailors coming into the city. Possibly even a lighthouse. Maybe you would have burnt, had something burning on the rooftop. So a very interesting structure for a number of reasons. The stele of Baal, you can see here, is interesting. He's, of course, wearing the horned headdress we've come to expect of gods. He's in a smiting scene that's reflected in copper depictions of him. We find many of these at Ugarit in Cyprus as well. This standing pose, the smiting pose, we've come to see many times. In this case, right, again, covered with gold foil, the gold statues that Bernaburiash was complaining about, that were just coated with gold and not solid gold. But in the stele of Baal, we see Baal with a stylized thunderbolt standing atop two things. One, these stylized mountains, and two, the waves of the sea. So again, an artistic depiction of Baal with his attributes. He's a storm god again, so he has his lightning bolt. This is actually an image of the Ugaritic king. He's armed. He has these pigtails coming down. But right, we get the gist. He's standing on the sea and the land, dominating both the sea and the land, which is what Ugarit does, right? Ugarit has control over both the sea and the land. So very much so, it's very fitting to have Baal depicted this way. Let's see, so we looked at these anchors. We have other depictions of these gods that show up in the text. These are two statues also from Ugarit that we believe are the god El. Again, that father god that steps in and sort of sorts everything out between Baal and Mot. Not just in stone, right? We have a stone depiction of El, which would have been inlaid probably with precious stones, lapis lazuli. This one had its arms and its eyes taken out. But also, right, the same copper core statues covered in gold leaf that we saw with Baal as well. Other goddesses. Goddesses are very important, as we've seen, right? The Baal cycle depends on a goddess. It depends on Anat to rescue her brother. We see a series of goddesses in objects found at Ugarit. Ivory plaques, such as this one. Necklaces, gold pendants with these female figurines on them that are found at Ugarit and other sites in the southern Levant. Some of these are depictions of Asherah, who's the consort of El, the wife of El, and mother and nursemaid to 70 children, and also these other mythological individuals like King Keret. Anat, who we talked about, the sister of Baal, and Kadshu, which we believe is what this nude pendant is depicting, a goddess of fertility, these Kadshu pendants. Like any great Near Eastern city, this city is going to have a palace, of course. It's interesting to note that, look at the separation between the royal sphere, the secular sphere, and the religious sphere. I mean, these are two very different and separate areas. We've got the Acropolis, right, with these temples, and then also all these administrative works taking place here. And we know that from these texts that while the Ugaritic king did have a ritual role to play, mainly he was in charge of trade, administration, warfare, taking care of the city, and presiding over the Marianu. You guys remember the Marianu? We talked about them before. It's this Indo-European word. The Marianu are this warrior class. This class of nobles who have certain rights and duties to perform. So, for example, if the Ugaritic king needs soldiers, the Marianu, and again, this is that Indo-European word that means sort of young man. that we think it's connected with. But it appears to be a word that refers to this nobility, this chariot-owning class, almost like a feudal system, right? Of these merchant warriors who lived in the city and could be called upon to give service at times by the king. So this is sort of the royal court, if you will, of Ugarit. And we have these large houses, actually, in the southern city, in the central city, where most excavations are taking place today. These large houses that of the Marianu that show the kinds of trading contacts that they would engage in. So you have these merchants who really are operating independently and amassing wealth in a system that can only be described as kind of capitalist, really. Anyway, the city itself and the palace specifically. Let's take a look at this palace. It's a very large palace, as you can see. It was constructed over the course of about 150 years. Started around 1350 under King Nikmadu II, and it was built and rebuilt after the destruction of the site in 1350, and then finally destroyed in 1190. As you can see here, and this is from Rofe, you guys can check this out, 5 different archives were found in this palace. A palace that's built in the Syrian style. Again, right, you see our Bit Halani entrance, the portico, the column portico entrance that we expect from palaces in Syria, but maintaining the same structure that we've come to expect from Near Eastern palaces in general, right? You enter this main entrance, which is actually really interesting. It's fortified, it's defended by 2 little guard rooms on the side here. There's an archive, which was probably linked to the things coming and going in the palace. Number of administrative texts here, but these 2 guard rooms actually had slits, so you could look out and see who was coming and going, spy holes, if you will, to limit access to the site. Entering the main entrance, just like Mari, just like Alalak, you enter a courtyard. So we have our central courtyard, and indeed there are 5 courtyards in this palace altogether. And accessing the courtyard, one then continues on to the main throne room, where you'd have an audience with the king or his officials. So a palace, that again is done in the Syrian style, but also is very much derived on what we've seen before. The palace is approached from the west near the main city gate. And that city gate is quite impressive. It's a postern gate, meaning that one ends up going underneath the wall and the fortifications to access it. You walk in, you make a right-hand turn, and you walk up a set of stairs, and then you enter into this plaza, which you can see right here. There's the main gate, the royal palace, and these administrative buildings. This royal plaza, right off the bat, you're in the bustling commercial heart of the city. This gate was later built on top of and was approached through a second gate on top that was built above it. But the palace, as you can see, is quite spectacular. It's 7,000 meters square, and all of it constructed in fine dressed stone architecture. These cut stones with their fine edges, we call it ashlar masonry, A-S-H-L-A-R. And really it's a tremendous amount of effort that goes into making these very durable structures. We have letters actually from Byblos that talk about the palace, praising it for its size and its beauty, and you can see a reconstruction up here. Several sections of it probably being 2, if not 3 stories high. Again, one official entrance right here with the guard room, and 12 separate stairways that have been discovered throughout the palace that would have led to these 2nd and 3rd floors that would have been used for apartments, scribal areas, archives, and whatnot. The palace, similar to the houses at Ugarit, has a series of royal tombs built within it, inside it. So in this section of the palace, there are a number of royal tombs that were discovered that were built within the confines of the palace. And these are interesting too because Claude Schaefer, when he excavated them, found a series of intricate channels leading to these tombs where one could make libations and pour the libations, and they would funnel into a hole and drop down to the dead. So this ritual, we actually have texts that talk about some of the funerary rituals at Ugarit, these ceremonies and rituals called the Marzea, where we get a sense of what would have taken place. So libations to the dead for their continued sustenance into the afterlife seems to have been part of the ritual here. But just like these other houses, again, the dead are housed in an intramural setting, not an extramural outside, but intramural inside the city and inside the houses themselves. Let's take a look at some of the objects that come from Ugarit. We've looked, again, this is a tremendously rich city with metals and ivories, faience, murex, fabrics we've talked about, ivory carving, with contacts with Greece, Afghanistan, Egypt, Anatolia. But also we see just an example of the tremendous wealth in these gold bowls. Actually, one is a gold dish and one is a gold bowl. Both of these were found on the Acropolis at Ugarit. And really they're wonderful examples of that international style we talked about when we talked about Egypt before. These are objects that display iconography that is it runs the gamut, right? It's stuff that we find in Babylon, that we find in Egypt, that we find in Hittites, things that are immediately recognizable as elite icons, but not specifically culturally defined. So this bowl would find its home in Hattusas. It would find its home at Dur-Kurigalzu, at Amarna. And indeed, right, we saw many of these objects in the tomb of Tutankhamun even. So really, a great example is actually when they invented the euro, right? So you guys have seen euros, right? Obviously, a few of you probably. If you look at the euro today, you'll find arches, you'll find Gothic architecture, you'll find bridges. None of those objects really exist. None of those places really exist. It's a pan-European motif, right? Since it's a currency that's meant for all of Europe. So you won't find, for example, the Arc de Triomphe on a euro bill. You'll find something that looks sort of like it, but something that could also be found in Germany, something that could also be found in the Netherlands. In the same sense, that's what's taking place in the late Bronze Age. This iconography that goes hand in hand with those connected ideas of kingship that are so well represented in the Amarna correspondence. All right, so moving from Ras Shamra, we'll look at some of these other sites really quickly. Minyad el Bedia, the main port of Ugarit. And when Schaefer excavated this area, he found a number of storerooms with objects intact, thousands and thousands of these amphora, just ready to be shipped out, ready to be sent across the Mediterranean to places like Pylos and Mycenae in Greece. And in addition to the objects, right, the balances and weights that would have gone along in apportioning them, receiving payment, and then sending product out overseas. At Ras Ibn Hani, a bit to the south, there's a series of residential complexes, a small palace there. But interestingly, we